Welcome to Mondays with Mike, Game Changers in Lacrosse, where we cover topics related to lacrosse, education, and youth development. Today we're joined by Dom Starsia, four-time national champion coach from the University of Virginia, a National Lacrosse Hall of Famer, and a longtime executive board member at Harlem Lacrosse. Welcome to the conversation. Thanks for being here, Dom.
Happy to be here, Mike. Always happy to talk about Harlem.
So, your perspective on the sport of lacrosse, I think, is perhaps unique, and super comprehensive. You've been involved with the sport for a very long time, and things seem to be changing quite a bit these days in terms of the privatization of youth sports, and the college game is changing quite a bit. And I'm curious, what do you think are the most important issues facing the game today?
Well, I do think the game is in a critical moment right now. I mean, there are different versions of the game for the first time. The Olympics there's a possibility we'll have the Olympics, lacrosse in the Olympics in 2028. I think the question there of whether or not the Olympics will allow the Haudenosaunee to compete as a separate nation, I think is a very important one for all of lacrosse. I think we need to consider hard whether or not we want to be a part of that if they don't allow the Haudenosaunee to be a part of it. It is their game, to begin with. The Sixes version also is the Olympic version of the game. It's not particularly my cup of tea in the sense that it's sort of a box game outside on grass, but with you're a former goalie with big goals and goalies in field lacrosse equipment. And I don't think it respects scoring goals enough. It's too easy to score in the game. I mean, you think of guys. I did a podcast recently with Zed Williams at 6'3", 230 pounds. Can you imagine some former attackman trying to cover him in the open field, which is what the Sixes game is really? But if that's what the Olympics required, they wanted smaller rosters and smaller fields. Okay, then that's okay. Then that's just another version of the game. It's not my favorite, but it works. You have the indoor game, you have the PLL now, so there's all different kinds of things. I think most fans can probably find something that they really like. Personally, I think the college game itself has never been in a better place. I think the advent of the shot clock a few years back has given us a version of the game that is exciting. It's fast paced. You have dramatic lead changes late in the game because you're going to get the ball back. All of those things, I think, make for a really exciting game. And I happen to like the pace and flow of the college game. I find the PLL to be just a little bit frantic for my taste in terms of having a short clock. But it may just be that I'm an old lacrosse coach who pines for a little strategy, in these games. I think the more critical issue for the health of the game is what's going on in college sports in general. The NIL, the infusion of cash into the recruiting process and putting teams together. The teams that have more money can spend more money. A lot of teams are not going to be able to keep up with that. I think it's going to grow the separation between the haves and the have-nots. I look at a coach, we were talking earlier about Lars Tiffany, the present coach at Virginia, and one of my former players. I was with him recently, and he talked about all the time he needs to spend now trying to raise money, because they essentially can pay athletes to play. And old guys like me, I try to avoid as much as possible talking about the good old days, but I'm having a hard time, trying to imagine why we need to pay these families to play the game that we all played because we just love to play. Lacrosse is still essentially an upper middle class sport. And so most of these families can afford to send their son to Virginia and Duke and Brown and these good schools and all. And all of a sudden, these coaches are spending so much time trying to find money to pay players to come to their school and play lacrosse. So I'm struggling with that. I think college sports in general are in a precipitous place, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this unfolds over these coming years. I think the college sports in general could look very different 2 or 3 years from now. And generally, sports like men's lacrosse are not going to be at the front of the line in terms of what's available coming from these colleges. The women's programs might do a little bit better because of gender equity issues. But I don't know that all this money that's now required in college sports is a good thing for college lacrosse.
Yeah, it's as a sort of an outside observer, it strikes me as you might find institutions asking themselves some very fundamental questions where, if what it means to really have a competitive Division One athletics team is going to come at odds with lots of other things. So okay, do we want to have that? Do we want to do what's required financially to do that? And you might have to, some organizations might have to answer those questions. I just read an article yesterday about Drexel University struggling with enrollment and making serious budget cuts. And you think, okay, is the Drexel lacrosse team going to want to prioritize NIL or something if they're having to lay off staff and they're struggling to fill their enrollment goals? Or sort of like where does lacrosse fit into the overall university is a tough question. And it feels to me like the Wild West. Like there's a lot of unintended consequences that people don't really know what they are just yet.
Right. And we tend to think of the worst case scenario. And so these things have a way of working themselves out. But as you look at it and try to anticipate what's going to happen, it's a scary notion, and I was just asking someone the questions you just asked. I was just asking someone, why does Virginia have men's lacrosse? I mean, what does men's lacrosse bring to the University of Virginia? So, in addition to the budgetary things that you need to run a program, the 12.6 scholarships that lacrosse has always had, you know, uh, and now unlimited cash being able to be injected into the program. All this is new money, and so where was this new money beforehand? Now that we have it, and again, are we giving it to families that don't really need it? I don't blame the families for wanting it, frankly. If it's available, I'd be asking for it too. But are we giving this money when Harlem Lacrosse or Habitat for Humanity or Meals on Wheels or these other organizations that really could use this money, if it truly is available? And I think there's some hard questions that need to be answered there. Uh, you know, the reason that lacrosse is at a strange number like 12.6 scholarships is because it used to be 14 and all the scholarships got cut 10% across the board. And when I first got to Virginia back in 1992, I was being told that, expect the cuts to to continue, and it hasn't happened. Well, now the NCAA, has now approved 48 scholarships for men's lacrosse, and 35 for women's lacrosse. They probably had a dozen that they could give out prior. They've sort of opened the floodgates to all these things. Well, even Virginia, which is, one of the more well-to-do schools, they can't afford 48 scholarships in lacrosse. They can't do that. And so how are they going to keep up? And there are some schools that can afford that. The schools that are putting 100,000 people in their stands for football games, have extra cash. But even some of the haves are not going to be able to keep up with everybody. And like I say, I just philosophically have some issues with all the money that's being injected in the game. And again, I think of it more as a game that we just played because we loved playing. Really and truly, I should have been paying somebody to be able to play lacrosse at Brown. That's how much I enjoyed it at the time.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember when I was playing in the MLL, I was talking to a friend and they asked about how much I got paid to play, and they was like, "That's not very much." I'm like, I don't know. It feels like a lot to me. I'm just playing lacrosse. I'm getting to play lacrosse in the most competitive lacrosse. This is what I love to do. This is what I would want to do if there was no professional lacrosse. I would think of it as like a treat.
Right.
I might pay to go play in someplace like Lake Placid, but instead I'm getting paid, so it feels like kind of a win. But I understand kind of the economics of it all. It's
You might actually make the argument that if given its choice, the men's lacrosse might just give up all the scholarships, and prove to their administrators that they can live on less, as the administrators are trying to find this cash for the football guys, and for the women's athletes, to again to meet the equity concerns, you know, uh, And so instead of trying to imagine putting more money into lacrosse, I think in 95% of the cases, or even maybe even higher, that most of these families would be at the same college if all they had to work with was financial aid, uh, so the people that are coming to Virginia would still figure out how to make it work. I think that's the way it is, and unfortunately in our game, I just read an article about it. You have players, skipping a grade or being held back for a grade, changing schools. These are all things that people that can afford it, that they do. They're paying for the best club teams. The top 20 high school programs in the country are all private schools. Lawrenceville, Brunswick, Culver, Western Reserve, up and down the line, and so these are people that uh, can generally, afford to make this happen. And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from anybody, but I'm just trying to say, how do we protect this the sport like men's lacrosse? And I have some concerns.
Yeah, it's interesting putting on the Harlem Lacrosse hat for a second. The implications that concerned about. I also care about sort of like is our lacrosse program is going to survive and whatnot. But you know, in the past when we've seen kind of the arms race effect on college on universities, kind of the net effect is making college more expensive. It's one of the contributing factors that has made college grow, the cost of college grow at a pace that is far faster than inflation. And so that makes college more inaccessible to people who are low income. And when we're placing about 100 kids a year now in college, and we're very thoughtful and concerned about making smart financial choices for kids and families. That means optimizing their financial aid. And a place like Tufts being $100,000 a year is challenging. And you think about, okay, is one of the implications of this college athletics frenzy that you could see tuitions rise to try to cover some of it. That's something that I don't want to see, because I want to see college be more accessible to more people. But as you say, the money, it's new money, it's got to come from somewhere. I could see that being a potential impact here, where you see it sort of accelerates tuition inflation at some institutions, because they say, okay, we can do it, and we still can fill our incoming class. So I'm curious to hear, you're someone who's been with Harlem Lacrosse essentially since the very beginning. Just kind of what got you involved in the beginning, and what strikes you about what has changed about the organization?
It's funny, interesting. This past weekend, a classmate from Brown was at my house, and he was the one. He was a football teammate of mine at Brown, and then he went to the University of Virginia Law School. And a couple of years back, now probably 10 or 12 years now, he called me and said there was somebody at the law school who had played lacrosse at Yale that wanted to meet me. And so a friend of his. So I said, sure, I'll go over and do that. And so I went over to the law school, had a cup of coffee with Peter Kaufman, and Peter Kaufman said to me, look, there's a young guy here at the law school. You need to meet him. And so I said, sure, I'll meet anybody. So I went back, I don't know, a week or two later, and had coffee with Simon Cataldo, who was a first-year law school student at UVA, at Virginia Law. And so Simon is the founder of Harlem Lacrosse, and so we were sitting there. Harlem had just hired one of my former players, Wyatt Meltzer, as their second full-time employee, which I wasn't aware of, I think, until I sat down with Simon and he told me that. And then when he told me what Wyatt was going to be doing, I said essentially, there's no way, Simon. There's no way that Wyatt Meltzer, this blonde-haired, fair-skinned private school kid from Florida, has got an office in a public school in Harlem, in New York City, in Midtown Manhattan. And I got engaged with it a little bit, and I can't recall whether or not Wyatt brought his team to Charlottesville, or I went to New York City. But those two things happened very near to each other over the coming months. And from both when Wyatt brought his team to us, and then when I went up and saw what they were actually doing day to day, I was just shocked. That the discipline that Wyatt had these kids, the attention that they were paying to him, what he was asking of them, what they were willing to do. And so I told Simon and Wyatt, I said, okay, I'm in. I'll do whatever you need me to do. I'm busy, I said, but I'll do whatever I need to, whatever you need from me. And so that was the beginning of it. And then it was a year or two later when we put the executive board together. I remember when one of our executive board members, Chris Baldwin, was inducted into the was an honoree at our fundraiser. He talked about the first executive board meeting, when the first fundraiser we had in New York City, where he said, Dom lied to all his Virginia guys. I told him we were having an alumni meeting in New York, and so about 25 guys came. We were in a lawyer's office, and then that's when I introduced Harlem to these guys. We raised a little money, and that was the beginning of the annual fundraiser and the advent of the executive board, and going on from there. And to be honest with you, Mike, it's just, for me, it's been a labor of love. I do what I can do. My job was primarily, in the beginning especially, to introduce Harlem to the college game, and I found that when I kind of the same reaction that I had when I would talk to college coaches in the early days. I'd be saying, "Look, I need some helmets, or I need some balls. We need stuff." I never had a coach turn me down. And then the requests got a little different, but they continued, and then the college guys wanted to be involved. They wanted to have the Harlem people come to campus. They wanted to visit New York City, and now we have programs in different cities and stuff, so more colleges can touch Harlem lacrosse in these different venues, and it's been really cool to see. And again, for me, I see young people actually being helped. And so I coached college lacrosse for a long time. We did some very nice community service things over the years, but I hardly ever had a firsthand look at what we were actually doing the way I do with Harlem Lacrosse, where we now see people. I'd go to practices, and we'd see people playing, and then now the program has matured where we have lots of people getting ready to go to college, which is a whole different set of issues for Harlem, but it's been very gratifying to get to this point where we have now moved on to this next thing. So, I'm getting older. I think of the young blood that might need to come through and all, but I love what I'm doing, and I love being involved still. And again, you asked about the growth of Harlem. At first, I was actually not really in favor of expanding to other cities. I mean, I was there in the conversation. I was there in the conversation when we were trying to decide what to call it. Do we call it Boston lacrosse, and finally decided that it was going to be Harlem lacrosse and with these other cities and all. And then I also was not particularly in favor of, again, visiting other schools. For me, there was the magic of, I mean, I'm a New Yorker. I was born in New York City. My father was a New York City cop. Harlem was a mysterious place. All of a sudden, I'm in Harlem, at these schools, at these practices. I'm having dinner in Harlem at these things. There was a certain mysticism, a certain magic for me with Harlem, with actually Harlem, New York. And so when we talked about we're going to go to Boston or Philly, I'm not so sure. But now I see that we've had an impact in these other places, and it's been a good development and stuff, and so it's been really cool. So we went from the first day I ever heard about Harlem Lacrosse, when we had 2 full-time employees, to having over 60 now, and so it's been an amazing journey.
Yeah, and one which you deserve a lot of credit, and lots of other people that, thinking about Wyatt as the second employee working with kids, there's 40 people who are program directors who work with kids every day at Harlem Lacrosse, and that's something that makes me very proud and gives me optimism, because I know the work that's happening on the ground. Like you say, it's making a real difference. When I hear stories, I just saw a message earlier today of a group of kids who took a trip to Princeton, a group of girls, and had incredible experience this weekend. And it just makes me happy to see that happening at this scale. I want to get back to something you were commenting earlier about the sort of like the shifts in the game, because I think it does have implications for Harlem Lacrosse, which is, the people who have access to the sport, who makes up who are the best high school lacrosse teams, where is high school lacrosse played, what do college lacrosse rosters look like? When I look at like the Brown roster or something, we used to, maybe be 50-50, I would say, public school and private school. And I think that that's not the case today. And I think it's quite uncommon to see college lacrosse roster with a lot of public school kids. Certainly, club lacrosse. Someone who graduated high school in the year 2000, I think I maybe played in 2 lacrosse tournaments ever before I went to college. And, I didn't, I spent very little money developing myself as a lacrosse player. My family did. Not nothing, it was something, but it was nothing compared to what happens today. And it does give me concern about the accessibility moving forward. I'm just curious to hear your perspective on it. On the one hand, I see more resources ever being invested in youth lacrosse and high school lacrosse, which provides a great experience. On the other hand, I have some concerns about the disparity that it creates between who has true meaningful access to it and who does not.
Yeah, I don't think there's enough of a concern amongst the powers to be in the game for the people that don't have resources, in terms of access to the game. That's a grave concern of mine. It's interesting, like we were talking about earlier, about the money being infused in the college game, and then you and I are involved with Harlem Lacrosse, and mostly first generation applicants, mostly full need students and stuff. And so it sort of defines both boundaries. I don't think there's any doubt that if you don't have means, you are swimming furiously trying to keep up in the recruiting of that's going on in the game. I would always be telling people you don't have to play for the best club team. If you're good enough, the college coaches will find you. And I believe that's still true. Uh, but it's easier if you're playing on one of those good club teams. And those good club teams, you know, it's so competitive right now that they can charge anything. I was with somebody the other day, Teddy Lomity, a former player of mine at UVA, and Teddy was a class of about 2005, and his 7-year-old, I think it was 7-year-old, he's involved playing some club lacrosse and $4,000, so you think of our Harlem kids, the kids that are coming up before they get to us in middle school when they're 7 years old. Their parents are not paying $4,000 to play lacrosse. That's not an option, and so, the game is still, most easily accessible to people with means, and say what you want. That's the truth of it. I saw an article the other day, and the lead of the article was sort of why does schools like Harvard and these elite colleges have crew teams, squash teams, and lacrosse teams? Because these are mostly upper class white kids, and it's a version of legacy admissions, is what this article was implying, is that these colleges, between those three sports, there's about 100 kids. So these three sports, because they give preferred admissions to those sports. So there's about 100 kids in those guys in those sports that are getting into Harvard, and it's a way to, sort of provide access for these upper level kids, upper economic kids and stuff. The Harlem kids aren't getting that same advantage. They can't afford to, again, be rowing crew at 7 years old, so that they get on the best club team to be seen by the best coaches. Now again, there's also the other side of it, is that I think there are more minority kids playing college lacrosse than ever before. We keep talking about the lack of minorities in the game. Well, there are more. I remember when I was playing, there weren't a lot of minority kids playing the game. There are more now, almost every college team. So there's some growth at that level in the game. There's not a lot of talk, I don't think, enough talk about what Harlem can do for kids like that, I think, because we are the wellspring of, minority representation in the game, frankly, and so you'd like to see, and like I would like to see, they have these fancy club tournaments, these high school tournaments and stuff. You know, I'd like to see the owners of the tournament, who are making money hand over fist, and I don't deny them the ability to do that. I'd like to see them say to Harlem, for instance, send your all-star team here. We're gonna pay for you to play in this tournament. I think there are things that people could do that would not be that expensive that would promote goodwill and also truly promote some growth in the game, not just amongst families that can afford to do it. So
Yeah. Well, it's well said, and there's a few things that I'll add. You mentioned the $4,000 for a 7-year-old to play lacrosse. Harlem Lacrosse, as you know, does a lot of college counseling, which includes financial aid. Last year, there were 55 kids in our senior class. The average SAI, which used to be called EFC, Expected Family Contribution. This is an assessment of your taxes, what the federal government believes that you should be expected to contribute to college.
right.
So your financial aid package can be calculated. It was less than $1,500, so a year. So our families, according to the federal government, have somewhere between zero, in the neighborhood of $0. There were many families with SAIs lower than zero. To invest in college, you think, or is that someone who can invest $4,000 in a private lacrosse experience for their 7-year-old? Definitely not.
And that number probably doesn't reflect the exact cost of going to college, that there are other expenses that are there for a family. So, if again, if the school says, hey, you can afford $1,500, which is a stretch for a family, you could probably double that for what their expenses are actually going to be. And now they're thinking, God, this is next to impossible. How are we going to do this? It's really, I was a full financial aid kid at Brown. And so I know that life anyway, that financial aid life and what that's like and all. And, you feel for families that are trying to make it work.
But at the same respect, I think you've characterized the challenge, but also highlighted some of the solution. Which, when you talk about club operators, we have some amazing club operators and tournament operators who are very supportive of Harlem Lacrosse. And I gave a talk a couple of years ago at a conference for some club operators. And, my commentary is basically the privatization of youth sports is creating disparity. It's, as you say, it's easier if you have resources. And I consider a comprehensive youth sports experience much like a comprehensive education. It's a pathway to wealth and self-determination. It's one way that you can get where you want to go in life, just like having great teachers. And so if we say as a society that those pathways are most open only to those people who have resources, we'll be left with too much disparity. That's not the world that I want to live in. But on the positive side, as you know, I get to meet people all the time who, even many people who have benefited from that disparity, who say, yeah, I agree. I don't think that that's fair. And so what can we do? And that's where Harlem Lacrosse comes in. We are trying to provide the very best experience, equivalent to what you would pay on the open market for the best club experience. We want you to have access to that at Harlem Lacrosse, and today it does. We have our national club teams. If you are a 6th grader in North Philadelphia, you come to Olney Elementary School, you pick up a lacrosse stick and you say, I love this. I dream of playing college lacrosse. And as a college coach, you think, well, you got to have a club team. You got to have a bunch of coaching to develop you over time. You got to have academic support. You're going to have help with the recruiting process. All those things are things that exist at Harlem Lacrosse. And we're saying to kids and families, if you want it, the pathway is there. And so I do recognize some of the challenge of it, but I also have optimism because I see amazingly generous people all the time saying, yeah, I agree. Let's do it.
And it goes back to what I was saying earlier when I first began to ask college coaches. I said, "Here's what we're doing. We need a little help." Nobody said no. Everybody wanted to help. And it's the same now. I think it speaks to the spirit of generosity amongst lacrosse people. It doesn't mean that they're going to deny their own child the access to that club team. But yes, I'm willing to help you, Mike. And then we just got to be able to get enough of that so that we can actually help kids and put kids in a position to be successful and give them access to the same kind of experiences that these other kids have.
Yeah, I would never disparage anyone for investing in their own child's youth development or education. I want that. I want that for all kids. I think it's a beautiful thing. I watch youth lacrosse. I'm like, this is amazing. It's way better than what I played. These kids are incredible. The coaching's incredible. The playing experiences are incredible. I want that. And our challenge as a society is to say, how do we ensure that we have that for the most people possible, and we limit kind of the disparity that exists. Thank you. That's basically all we had, and I'm really grateful for your time and your perspective as always.
Always a pleasure, Mike. I love talking about this and being involved. And like I say, for me, I spent a period of time there for a while, kind of getting to all the new programs we were developing and all. I'd like to, imagine I'm going to be able to get back out on the road and get my hands on some of these programs and some of the coaching and stuff. And because it's just it's really the fun part of what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we got plenty of opportunities coming up, so I'll let you go. And thanks again, Dom. It was great, as always, to connect. Thanks for tuning in to Mondays with Mike, Game Changers in Lacrosse. We release new episodes on all major streaming platforms and the Harlem Lacrosse YouTube channel. To learn more about our transformative model and impact, visit harlemlacrosse.org.